Last year, the beginning of Lent fell on February 26th. It was shortly after that the world pretty much changed for an extended period of time. If we're being honest, this Lent, or at least coming into this Lent, feels almost like the last Lent never ended. Thinking back on Ash Wednesday about 2 or 3 years ago for me, I was serving as a chaplain in a hospital setting. Rolling around the hospital, I began imposing ashes on the heads of patients. And then I was tasked with going into the hospital's chapel and meeting with doctors and nurses and other staff persons who wanted to have ashes imposed on their foreheads. And I struggled. I struggled with that because the reason why we impose ashes on the heads of folks on Ash Wednesday is to remind us of our mortality. See, I struggled with reminding people who watched other people struggle in their health and sometimes die. I struggled with reminding them of their mortality. For me, it seemed as though they were reminded of their own mortality every day. They didn't need ashes on their foreheads. Similarly, I find myself struggling with reminding us today that Ash Wednesday is about sitting in the tension between life and death, knowing that one day, just as we emerged from dust, according to Scripture, one day we will all return to dust. I believe that we've been surrounded by enough death, enough isolation to know that the world as we know it or once knew it, in some way, shape, or form, is always changing, moving us closer toward something that we know not about. For those of us who call ourselves believers, that is the hope of eternity. But in this moment, this present moment, we're sitting with the reality of not knowing the future. So what do we do with this tension? I don't know if I have a magical answer with how to navigate the tension that we're sitting in right now. I don't know if I can give you a schedule as to when it will all be back to normal, when we'll be together again, when we won't be relegated to experiencing everyone's company via screens. I don't have any magical answers for you. As a pastor, it pains me to not be able to sit with folks and hold their hands and to let them know that I care about them. It pains me that we live in a world where, in order to be safe at this moment, means that we must stay apart. That is a bit overwhelming in this moment. And yet, it is the reality of where we are. Looking at our scripture for today, Isaiah chapter 58, starting at verse 1, the prophet is tasked with telling the people that they believe they have it all together. They've done everything that God has asked them to do in their eyes, and yet God has not lifted suffering from them. God has not intervened in the way that they would have expected God to. Isaiah chapter 58, verse 1 begins this way: Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were in a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet, on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fast or fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and unite the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and the Lord will say, Here am I. The prophet Isaiah is presented with a people who believe they have done everything right. And yet, God reminds them through the prophet that everything that they thought they were doing right is for naught up until this point. Their fasting is null and void because they fast out of mere obligation, hoping that God will somehow intervene in their situation. Why is this important? This is important because often on Ash Wednesday and at the beginning of Lent, it is the call of the pastor, the challenge of the clergy person to remind those who we care for of their mortality. And if I did that this year, I would be doing it simply out of obligation, not because God has called me to do it, simply because that is typically what is done on Ash Wednesday. I honestly don't think that I need to remind you that death is something that we will all face. I don't need to remind you that it hurts to be apart. I don't need to remind you that in many ways the world right now absolutely sucks. Some of you may not appreciate the language of saying that the world right now sucks. Some of you may have more colorful language for where we are. Whatever way you decide to express the tension within your souls, I would encourage you that God is big enough to handle it. I want to use words from Pope Francis in helping us reorient or think through different ways that we might fast this year. Pope Francis, a few years ago, came out with a statement that said we should fast from hurting words and say kind words, fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude, fast from anger and be filled with patience, fast from pessimism and be filled with hope, fast from worries and have trust in God, fast from complaints, contemplate simplicity, fast from pressures and be prayerful, fast from bitterness, fill your hearts with joy, fast from selfishness and be compassionate, fast from grudges and be reconciled, fast from words, be silent and listen. As we enter into Lent, the season of contemplation, the season of, or that we liken to wilderness, may you lean into finding different ways to fast this year. May in your fast you find God anew. And may your spirits be enriched as we long for a time we come out on the other side of this